What's going on, everyone? John Matrix here. Hope you're all having yourselves a wonderful day wherever you're at, whenever you're watching this. We're gonna be doing, I guess, an SCP Magnus Archive side story, where we're just actually having an SCP discussion with my group here. So the SCP was on the mind. But yeah, we're gonna be doing, I guess, a little side episode from the Magnus Archives. Member of the community brought this up. The Magnus Archives, What the Ghost, the Devil's Dance. So we're gonna check out this episode here today. Links, as always, will be down below in the description to the Magnus Archive stuff, all of their playlists, the YouTube playlists, excuse me, their Patreon and their website. So please do me a favor, go over to their YouTube channel, like all the episodes of the Magnus Archives that you've enjoyed. Hit the sub button while you're there. Great ways to give them some love and support. And yeah, check out their Patreon, YouTube memberships, and website to find ways to give them some extra love and support if you indeed would like to do so. There is a join button underneath this video, as well as a link in the description to the YouTube membership benefits and tiers that I have to offer here for my channel, so you can take a look at those if you'd like to give my channel some extra love and support. But yeah, so we're gonna jump into this here, the Magnus Archives, What the Ghost, the Devil's Dance. So let's do that.
Hi there, Haunts fans! I'm Georgie Barker, and this is another episode of What the Ghost, your weekly insight into ghouls, ghosts, and ghastly goings-on. We'll be peering into the murky depths of history this week, unraveling the story of a deadly plague that spread terror across Europe for centuries. Terror and funk. Now, we all know there was nothing unusual about widespread illness in the Middle Ages, but this affliction was very different. With a modern understanding of medicine, we can look back and explain away diseases like the Black Plague, though regular listeners will know to take that explanation with a protective sprinkle of salt.
What was that?
But even now, we're as much in the dark about this epidemic as they were in the Dark Ages. And what's so intriguing about this plague is how the infected were affected. They danced themselves to death. That's right, folks. Over hundreds of years, unconnected individuals would start up a jig, first drawing in a partner, then a troupe, eventually dragging the whole town into a frenzy of footwork until fever and exhaustion forced them to collapse, sometimes never to get up again. The people of Europe called it Choreomania, the dancing plague. But although it may seem supernatural, I'm sure there's a rational explanation.
Is that what's going on this whole time? Like, is while the world is ending around them, the apocalypse is happening, George is out here making a little podcast. Is that what's happening right now?
Isn't there? On a warm July day in Strasbourg 1518, Frau Trophea stepped out of her front door and danced to the end of her street. She kept dancing as she made her way to the town centre. Her arms and feet whirled through the market square in time to music only she could hear. Her friends and neighbours laughed and clapped as they watched her spin and step across the city. They cheered her on all day and well into the night before she collapsed from exhaustion. But just a few short hours later, she was awake and dancing once again. She was still dancing 3 days later, now in blood-soaked shoes. It was almost a week before she finally died. There are reports that her body kept moving in time to some mysterious melody, even in death. By that time, 34 people had joined her. Within a month, a crowd of 400 were manically dancing through the streets of Strasbourg, without food, drink, or rest. As many as 15 of them a day seemed to have no choice but to dance themselves to death. It's no wonder the townsfolk called it the Devil's Dance. On its own, this story would be strange.
So is this... Like, The Grifter's Bone is the only episode I can think of, but there was another episode that got into music and dancing and stuff like that, right? Is this kind of alluding to that? Is this, going back to, I guess, one of the fears with their musical things getting people to do stuff? Is there a connection with one of those episodes?
What we'll hear today definitely crosses the line into spooktacular. But first, let's hear a little bit about a friend of the podcast.
Oh, okay.
Being up close and personal with the supernatural all day can really wreak havoc with your nerves at night. That's why I need the best possible
Gotcha.
mattress to help me drift off to sleep.
No,
Luckily,
gotta get the advertising
I
in.
have my bed cetera mattress so I can rest in peace. Its 7 layers of high-tech latex foam keep me safe from the
I get it. You know, because she had the brush in with death. You know, she might be a death avatar. Rest in peace. I get it. I see what they're doing here.
specter of back pain, and the precision-engineered platinum alloy springs make my posture as good as ghoul. And I've got great news. The generous folks at BedCetera are giving all What the Ghost listeners a spooktacular deal. Just enter the code FRIENDLYGHOST at the checkout for a 5% discount. BedCetera, the only mattress.
Surprised they didn't, you know, they use code Casper. The friendly ghost, you know. Anyway.
That'll keep the nightmares away. God.
Mm.
You're listening to What the Ghost. What happened in Strasbourg in 1518 might be the most famous and well-documented account of the dancing plague, but it's certainly not the only one. There are reports of whole towns being compelled to dance into an early grave from as far back as the 7th century. In 1374, the dance consumed a population so vast it covers what is now northern France, Belgium, and Luxembourg.
Really?
In medieval Italy, crowds of people were unable to stop their frenzied feet from hurling themselves into the sea. But one of the strangest cases occurred in 1237, in a town called Erfurt in Germany. Records from the time say that for one day, 100 children started feverishly dancing, moving as one all the way to Arnstadt, over 12 miles away, before all collapsing of exhaustion. Their feverish movements stopped as suddenly as they started. Though the facts about the children of Erfurt are hidden in the depths of history, their story lives on in the fearsome tale of the Pied.
I was gonna say, is this how the fairy tale of the Pied Piper came? I was literally just gonna say that before she started talking.
Piper. I'd always assumed the story of the Pied Piper of Hamelin was a fairy tale, but it seems there's more to this legend than meets the ear. After all, we know by now that legends have long roots in history. Perhaps there was more to the Pied Piper than I'd imagined. The first written record of the tale appears in the Town Chronicles from 1384. It states simply, "It is 100 years since our children left." Creepy. So, we know that the children left in 1284, 47 years after the children of Erfurt, a town nearly 200 kilometres away from Hamelin, made their fretful journey to Arnstadt. A stained glass window was placed in the church of Hamelin in 1300, showing the children following a brightly coloured man playing a pipe. That window is the earliest record we have of the Pied Piper story, and it's also the only record that shows the piper. I have to wonder, if we had images of the children from Erfurt, would they also show a brightly coloured musician, leading the youngsters away from the town? Fans of What the Ghost will know that children are much more open to the supernatural than we are as adults. It's hardly rare for people to experience unexplained phenomena. Unexplained, that is, until their children describe what they alone can see. But was the paranormal really responsible for...
Yeah, it was a little creepy, you know? The situations where you see like a little baby, like, you know, looking at a corner or like kind of pawing at something, or even an animal, right? Like your cat or something is sitting there doing something and all of a sudden it's like turns and like stares at nothing. It's always a little creepy. It's always a little creepy when that happens. What do they see that we don't?
the devil's dance? Could there be a more rational explanation? Find out after this message from our valued sponsor. I often find myself covered in scratches from being out in the field. That's why I always take Urban Survival's basic first aid kit with me wherever I go. These handy kits hold
Georgie doing
everything
the live
from
reads here.
bandages and plasters to antiseptic wipes and bigger plasters. Haunted hotspots are full of frights, from spectres to splinters, but with an Urban Survival first aid kit in your backpack, you can forget your fears of minor injuries. Urban Survival, because it's an urban jungle out there.
I can only imagine, Georgie sitting here actually doing the reading on the podcast, right? And then Melanie must be the producer, in the booth, and Melanie's just like giving her the double thumbs up, good job, Georgie.
Oh, come on. Want no limits to your ghost hunting? Equip yourself with the Urban Survival Deluxe Preparedness Package, featuring
Not the
everything
deluxe
included in the basic
package.
first aid kit, plus matches, compass, rope, water purification tablets, tinfoil blanket, crowbar,
Sounds like a Dungeoneers pack in D&D.
and trademarked Urban Survival Nutri Rations, all stored in an easy-to-carry camo-printed box. Urban Survival, because the city is the wilderness of today.
Well, that's what I mean. I'm saying right now that they're together, right? Like I could see her be doing this podcast and Melanie's like producing, because Melanie used to also, have her own show.
Day. Welcome back to What the Ghost with me, Georgie Barker. Before the break, we heard about the mystery of the Devil's Dance and its link to the story of the Pied Piper of Hamelin. Though the circumstances are certainly spooky, we don't need to look to the paranormal to find an explanation. The time when the dance was at its height was a period of extraordinary hardship across Europe. It's hard for us to imagine now quite how difficult life was in the late Middle Ages. Local famines were widespread and weather was cruel in a time when heavy rain could be the difference between life and death. With no real understanding of what caused disease, the average life expectancy for millions of people was less than 30 years. And for most people, a life of serfdom meant that those 30 years would be spent in back-breaking servitude, struggling to survive while you worked for the profit of your local landowner.
Mm-hmm.
Life had been pretty sweet in Western Europe for the centuries before 1280, when wheat crop yields started to drop. Until then, the climate had been good and populations were booming. But when food production couldn't keep up, prices started to climb, and just a few years later, the weather started to turn. Winters were severe and summers were cold and wet. Crops failed from Ireland to Germany. Many cities and towns lost a quarter of their population, and even King Edward II had trouble finding food. Crop levels didn't recover until 1325, and not soon after, the Black Death first hit Sicily. It ran through countries like a fire that couldn't be stopped, and would be killing people across the continent for the next 300 years. At the same time, political upheaval was everywhere and warfare was changing, with gunpowder, longbows, and new, deadlier siege weapons to worry about. Whether it was a bloody death on the battlefield, a gruesome fatal disease, or watching yourself and your friends slowly starve, trauma could be present in every day of people's lives. Do we really need to look to the supernatural to explain the odd behavior of these medieval townsfolk? Hardship and hunger can play odd tricks on the mind. Compulsive behavior is far from uncommon during difficult times, and the combined emotional and physical stress that medieval Europeans lived through could...
Well, I mean, again, it's interesting how, with the context of the podcast, what you're saying, right? Everything was good, and then, crops started to fail because the weather started to fail, and then as soon as the crops started to recover, then the Black Plague happened and started ravaging everyone. That lasted for 300 years, and then, wow, that was also going on. Lots of wars and, innovation in weaponry was happening, with gunpowder weapons taking over longbows and new kinds of siege weapons. So you could see the various evolution of the fears going on through all that as well.
well have led to hallucinations, whether a spectral strain of music or even a whole crowd of dancers, though really there were only one or two. Some psychologists propose that certain kinds of psychosis can even be contagious. Could mass hysteria account for the way that dancing mania swept through communities? While stress and trauma may well have been necessary conditions for the dance, it's hard to believe that's the whole story. Medieval Europe was a difficult time and place to be alive, but it's far from the only culture to be struck by severe ongoing hardship. And while we might understand how individual towns and villages experience bouts of mass mania, what was it about these people, at this time, that made their supposed psychosis take the same form, from 13th century Italy to 17th century England? In fact, it takes a certain amount of twisting the facts to make this account fit at all. Take the most well-documented case of Strasbourg, starring Frau Trafia. Many historians would have us believe that the dancing mania there was a direct result of the hardship following the Black Plague, which had hit the town over 200 years earlier. We don't have to look far for another possible explanation, though. Just as far back as episode 97 and our discussion of the Salem witch trials. That's right, the most popular story among modern historians is that the Devil's Dance was nothing more than a widespread bout of ergot poisoning.
Yeah.
For newer listeners, ergot is a psychoactive fungus that grows on rye, used to make the bread that many people lived on almost exclusively in the Middle Ages, right through to Tudor times. A loaf infected with ergot would lead to hallucinations, delusions, and muscle spasms. Eat enough bad bread and you could find your movements were out of your control. But could fungus poisoning really keep you dancing for up to 20 miles? Although ergot might have been partly responsible in some cases, dancing mania affected areas that didn't grow rye at all. And in the middle of a medieval famine, if you didn't grow a crop, you didn't eat it. What's more, ergot poisoning could only have struck during the wet season it needs to grow, but there's no correlation between rainy periods and outbreaks of the Devil's Dance at all. But before we dive any deeper, let's hear our final message from another one of our sponsors. Why couldn't the ghost go to the party? Because he hadn't signed up to sparksfly.com to find a date. Wouldn't it be great if your dating service knew you as well as your friends do? Well, sparksfly.com does. In fact, they know you better than anyone. With Sparksfly, there's no need to fill out lengthy surveys. They get all the information they need from your browser history.
Just killing them with these live reads.
Wow. Okay. What the Ghost listeners get a month's membership for free. No need for a code. They already know who you are. Sparksfly. Privacy is just another word for loneliness? I went out with someone I met online once. We didn't have a lot in common. I mentioned the podcast and he spent the rest of the night complaining about the Ghostbusters remake. But we had Thai food, so it was an okay date. Got the tofu massaman curry. Anyway, records of towns struck by dancing mania start to dwindle in the 17th century, but the story doesn't quite end there. There have been recent sightings of people behaving in a similar way to those taken by the Devil's Dance. Although it hasn't affected entire towns, that we know of, a few people claim to have seen groups of 10 or 20 people moving in a way that can best be described as, well, creepy. They describe the dancing body as behaving inhumanly. At first glance, or out of the corner of your eye, the dance steps appear as contortions as limbs crack and bones warp, the skin pulled taut as it stretches over impossible angles. Of course, on closer inspection, almost all the witnesses admit that what appeared to be deathly writhing was in fact lively but ultimately mundane choreography, even if it did leave the viewer unsettled. Of course, drugs, stress, and plain old exhaustion can play all sorts of tricks upon the mind, and an energetic dancer can throw some pretty dramatic shapes, so it's not surprising that hallucinations of breaking bodies are common. And let's not ignore the fact that sightings spiked around 2004 when flash mobs were considered the height of cutting-edge fun. What is mysterious, though, is the number of odd reports from the graveyards of towns that were affected by the dance.
Ooh.
Historians, police officers, and city planners who exhume the bodies find them looking mutilated or mutated. Reports describe skeletons with too many bones, limbs that are
Definitely sounds like she's like, yeah, she's doing her podcast talking about supernatural stuff, and there's like, it almost feels like this is another version of some of the earlier episodes of the Magnus Archives, right? Where like, she's not really getting a statement here, right? She's doing her podcast and talking about supernatural stories, and some of these supernatural stories probably have like something to do with the fears, you know, with like her talking about historical incidents with, you know, like the Black Death probably was some kind of plague brought on, you know, by the corruption in context of the Magnus universe, and probably also with, you know, crops and things, you know, going bad. You know, I don't know would it be the buried? Would they be a fear that would introduce, you know, climate change? Because they have to do with storms and stuff like that. So, you know, and now she's talking about these mutilated bodies, and obviously that could be something with the flesh. So there definitely seems to be a correlation with some of these fears and these various supernatural stories. So it almost feels like her podcast is kind of going back to how some of the earlier statements in Magnus Archives were back when John was still skeptical and didn't really know what was supernatural and whatnot.
Too long and joints that bend in a way that the best doctors claim they should not. Spooksome. Although there are plenty of people who claim to have seen the Devil's Dance, if you know where to look, none of them can coherently describe how the dance goes. Most eyewitness accounts start plainly enough, but they tend to tail off into ramblings when they try to lay out the steps and moves they've seen. Could it be that all these people are spontaneously joining a dance so complex it defies description? Or is there some mysterious power that keeps witnesses' minds vague? Whatever the secret of the Devil's Dance, keep an eye on your feet next time you find yourself on the dance floor. The music may stop, but who knows if you will. That's it for this week's episode of What the Ghost. Join us next time when we'll be at the Edinburgh Fringe hearing about a comedian who literally died on stage and now haunts the back room of the pub where only the acts can hear him heckle. Don't forget to subscribe for future episodes of What the Ghost, leave us a review, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Oh My Ghostness, and download our lock screen and ringtone at www.wtghost.com. Thanks for listening, and remember, stay out of the shadows.
Ooh. Any more here at the end? Sounds like we're going into the normal outro here. Okay, well, there we go. That was an episode of What the Ghost, The Devil's Dance. You know, George's little podcast here. A little side episode from the Magnus Archives. So thank you guys for watching. Links to all their stuff will be down below in the description, as always. To the Rush School Podcast YouTube channel, the Magnus Archives playlist, and to their website. So please do me a favor. You know, like all the episodes on their YouTube channel that you have enjoyed. Hit that sub button over there if you haven't already. And yeah, check out their YouTube memberships, their Patreon, and their website to find ways to give them some extra love and support if you indeed would like to do so. Like I said, you know, the podcast episode here from Jordy, it almost kind of sounded reminiscent of some of the season 1 episodes of the Magnus Archive, where John was going over statements and we didn't really know, you know, how much of the supernatural was real or not. Was this, you know, just reports from people, and could any of these be written off as some kind of psychosis or disorder or anything like that, or was it a real supernatural thing? You know, that's what it felt like to me anyway. So yes, Georgie did well on her podcast, indeed. So but yeah, thanks for listening, guys. Hope you enjoyed this. Consider leaving a like and a sub, it helps me and the channel grow. There's a join button underneath the video, as well as a link in the description to the YouTube membership benefits and tiers that I have to offer. So feel free to check those out if you'd like to give me some extra love and support. There's also a bunch of playlists on the channel for other universes to do reactions for, and there is a link in the description to the community Discord if you would like to join our community members. And yeah, come in and hang out and join the Magnus Archives discussions that we have in there. So yeah, thanks for listening. Have yourselves a wonderful rest of your day. See you on the next one.